Legends and myths from the past, stories that forever last, in the hearts of mortal men.
I am Captain Victor T. Mayfair. I run a podcast. I travel through time and space and I talk to characters and creatures of all different types. And today I'm here to talk about Kaiju and their history and where they come from. What you heard before I was just playing was some excerpts from my podcast. I'm all over. Please listen to me if you can. You go to my websites. I know a couple people already looked at my website. A pretty extensive collection of different information and stuff up there. On all the major podcast services, I currently have season 1 up. There's over 20 episodes, so look for Mythos Anthology and you'll find everything. And I'm in a booth down in the South Hall GSP 14. If you want to come by and talk, please do. I don't tend to do a lot of question and answer in these things because the next person is waiting to get in. If you want to talk to me, and please do, come down to my booth and I'm happy to talk. I'm here for the next couple of days. We're here at Comic-Con. Comic-Con to me is the mecca of mythology. And my entire existence is about exploring mythology and how it changes and morphs and the change in stories and the things that we've seen. It's an amazing life to be able to sit here and look at stories and history and how they've changed. And in our lifetimes, the unbelievable change that stories have taken. Behind the scenes, my name is actually Victor Ciccarelli. I'm a technologist, an artist, a creative who has been privileged to have seen some pretty amazing things in my life. How's that? Is that going to pick me up any better? Okay. I've seen some pretty amazing things in my life. My life kind of started as a kid in the 60s, lying on the floor, watching black and white cartoons and all the kind of cool movies we used to see back then. And I got to really see the world change. I got to watch a lot of really neat things. I'm older than the internet, older than pagers, cell phones, computers, you name it. I was in line for the first Star Wars movie, you know, the good one, way back when, opening day. Yeah, got a couple giggles here. Yeah, okay. But I was there. I was there for those. I owned domain names in the 1990s before most people even knew what the internet was. So it gave me kind of a unique perspective on the world. I got to watch a lot of things change. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about Kaiju. We're here to talk about something much bigger, literally, figuratively, monsters that have taken over myth and mythology. But monsters aren't new. We talk about Kaiju, but monsters have been around for a long time. As long as there have been humans telling stories, we've talked about titans, giants that dwarfed everything. Godzilla rose from the sea, but humanity started monsters as a way to understand things bigger than ourselves. We needed a way to really understand the world around us. But these go back a long way. Gorgamon, right? Norse mythology. A monster so big that his tail sat in his own mouth, wrapped around the world and encircled the entire world, brought around Ragnarok. We have Leviathans of the sea, Hebrew mythology. Giant monsters that made their way through the oceans, really personified the unknown of the depths of the sea. There's a constant theme with all of our monsters. Typhoons, land monsters in Greek mythology. Right? They were around because at the time we couldn't understand these gigantic forces. Forces that didn't have intent. They were just chaos. So our monsters came to play. Behemoth, again from Hebrew mythology. Giant land monster. Stood as the embodiment of primal strength, the unstoppable force that would hit the immovable object. Yamato Ochi, 8-headed monster, Japanese mythology, right? Took sacrifices, terrorized ancient Japan. Again, these were typhoons and storms and things that they couldn't understand, that they had to turn into monsters so that they could put a face onto their fear, so they could dream of one day being able to conquer these monsters. And dragons. Well, I don't have to go on much about dragons, but if you do listen to my podcast, I had a really cool conversation with Fefnir that's on there, and he'll tell you all about dragons and their history. And the Kraken, Scandinavian mythology, killing ships and bringing sailors to their death. I used to be a sailor. Now I fly in the air. And I can tell you, Kraken is real. He's out there. Fenrir, the giant wolf, child of Loki, part of Ragnarok, and the Sphinx. When we think about giants and monsters, we don't always think about the Sphinx, but he was. He was a monster of thought. He was the thought that we couldn't conquer, the idea that was bigger than us. Mega monsters are the embodiment of our deepest fears, because they all represent the things that are too big for us to understand. They're larger than us. They're larger than life. We have to have a name for these kind of fears, and we make them monsters. But why is this important? Well, stories are part of humanity. Mythology is what we're all about. It's the thing that I love. And long before we could record on the internet and talk about our stories, bards traveled the world. They were the keepers of the truth. They were the keepers of our history. They were the keepers of morality. And they would travel from town to town, and they would tell these stories. And the way they told them was in ways people could understand. And people could understand large monsters. So we made all of these great monsters that would do things, but storytelling has changed. Storytelling has changed a lot. If you look at the timeline of history and storytelling, you'll see that the timeline for how things have altered has been compressed. The last 200 years, we've gone from printing press to AI now telling us stories. 60 of those years I've been around for and have watched happen. So stories have gone from something that was pen and paper to something that was books to TV to now computers and mega stories. Everything about our stories has changed, but the most important thing is stories have now become commoditized. Stories are now based on how many eyeballs they can get, how much money they can bring in. We no longer tell a story because it's going to carry on morality. We don't tell a story because it's going to carry on our culture. We tell a story now to make money. And because of that, everything about how we address monsters and how we address mythology is fundamentally different. We look at the world now packaged and sold and really down to streaming numbers, which is a shame because our bards now have a much more difficult task. It's hard for them to get your eyeballs. It's hard for them to carry on some of our cultural wisdom and what these monsters meant to us when they're being judged by how big of a blockbuster movie they became. And if you can't make enough money off the movie, you don't make it, which is a shame. We now only talk in terms of how many people listen. In the new age, it's really hard for these storytellers. And that's an important backdrop to understand as we talk about kaiju and how kaiju came to be. The word means strange beast or mysterious creature. But words, like mythology, change over time. And kaiju has now become a very specific brand of creatures, a very specific brand of monster. And it came from a very straight path. But even in modern movies and modern systems, mega monsters aren't that unique. Jules Verne, with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 1870, talked about giant octopus, right? Lost World, 1925, was really one of the first movies that brought out giant creatures and giant monsters using stop motion animation. It was a revelation at its time. It brought out a number of monsters. 1933, King Kong. King Kong come ravaging New York City, right? Again, a giant monster. These monsters are getting bigger and they're taking over. And then 1953, we get 20,000, the creature from 20,000 Fathoms. Again, a monster that in many ways birthed the kaiju. But we're going to talk about him in a minute because he has a very unique place in kaiju history. But it clearly was one of the forefathers. It was one of the things that brought around the Genesis. And this is where myth turns. Before kaiju, monsters were nature gone wrong. It was a dinosaur that got released from the ice. It was a undersea monster, a squid that got, octopus that got too big, right? Kaiju were different. Kaiju changed everything for us. And it happened because of a couple of rather unfortunate parts of history. The seed of Kaiju started on August 6, 1946. After the 6 years of World War II, the little boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. It brought upon the end of World War II, but it was an incredible disaster. It brought devastation and horrendous acts of horror to a nation. A land, a people, a culture were scarred forever. It may have brought the end of World War II. It was the beginning of a lot of healing for Japan. It was the beginning of an age of rebuilding. However, in the US, we saw something very different. We came home from World War II to a land that was looking like it was going to be, milk and honey, and everything was growing, and baby boomers were booming. And all the good stuff was happening on this side of the world, right? We saw our future as science fact. It brought around our atomic age, where we were seeing flying cars and we were seeing jetpacks and all kinds of cool stuff. From the American perspective, it was really a great time. We were zipping around in our jetpacks, and it was pretty awesome. Wasn't that way throughout the entire world. But coming off the 1930s, when pulp fiction and pulp magazines came, the comic book genre really started taking off. And now we start seeing pulp magazines bringing in billowing capes and comic book covers, red, blue, and gold, streaking across the skies, big S's on chests. We were the superheroes. The genre was taking off, except for Japan. They were still a conquered people. They were still an occupancy that didn't end until April 28th, 1952. In that time, their entire movie industry had been destroyed. The theater's gone, the industry over. And a lot of what they were seeing were Americanized movies or theaters that were completely controlled by American occupancy. And they were getting American movies that were retitled, that were using voiceovers. They weren't getting their own theater yet. Until the mid-1950s, when they hit their golden age. And all of a sudden, Japanese movie houses started putting out incredible movies. And they started getting all kind of international acclaim for these movies that they were producing. And they were doing really well. So now they're in this period of growth. They're getting really big. Everything's going great. And about this time, 2 American films came out. They reissued King Kong. And at the same time, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms came out. And these were culturally huge in Japan, as much as they were in the States. Okay, and in Japan, King Kong was a reissue. So now you've got a movie environment where they're growing their own movies, doing well, and we've got 2 American movies just did really well in Japan. And then, tragedy. Again, March 4th, 1954, the US and the Bikini Atoll was testing an atomic bomb, as we did back then, all kinds of stupid stuff. We blew up an atomic bomb that day as a test. The wind changed. And it dropped atomic ash on Lucky Dragon number 5, a fishing vessel that was in the ocean. And it brought down what was called at the time death ash. And it reopened major wounds. It rekindled all of the fears of everything that had happened in the past. Wasn't that many years since they were rebuilding and now getting nuked again. When a director and a producer had an idea, they took the combination of the mega monster movies that were being a hit and the current fear of nuclear anxiety because of the radiation, and they launched a movie. That movie was Godzilla. Godzilla was the embodiment of those fears. Godzilla in those days wasn't a villain, wasn't a hero. He was a force of nature. He was simply the embodiment of fear, the embodiment of radiation, something that could be understood. Remember that when you're dealing with radiation, it's the wound that has, the death that has no wounds. You don't see the effects. So it was easier to see Godzilla. He was a walking catastrophe. Like the typhoons and the earthquake, he had no malice. He had no mercy. He had no moral alignment. He was simply a force that was destroying, that needed to be understood. To the people in his path, he was destruction incarnate, a living reminder of the hubris of humanity's science gone wrong. The first monster that wasn't of nature, he was created by the hubris of science. He wasn't really the main character of the story. The main character of the original movie is more about the judgment of his existence. It was the act of the radiation. It was the things that were going wrong. And it was birthed, this whole genre. From that moment, Kaiju came to life. They are unstoppable, mega monster, not born of nature, born of man's hubris, born of technology gone wrong, which is the underlying principle of all kaiju. They are not natural born. They were born from hubris. In Japan, that played really well. 1 in 9 people in Japan saw the original Godzilla. The absolute cultural phenomenon at the time. 9.6 million tickets sold. A lot of people liked what they had to see. And it launched a couple of movies over the next few years. Once people got an idea that they liked Godzilla, yeah, there was 33 direct Godzilla movies over the next 70 years. And a few spin-offs, right? Had just a couple of other movies came out of the genre. In fact, 129 that I can count. So I did a couple of other movies followed along with that whole kaiju idea, right? And I guarantee that if there's any experts in the room, you can find 3 or 4 that I missed, because I had to pretty much cull the universe to find that list. So, kaiju. And what defines a kaiju? And let me drop back a bit and talk about the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. It is frequently referred to as a kaiju. It is definitely the precursor of all kaijus. But the beast from 20,000 Fathoms was a dinosaur who was released from the ice and was then killed. Which, those 3 factors right there make him not kaiju. He was a dinosaur, so he was natural. He was released from the ice, which meant he had been pre-existing. And the fact that they could kill him, you can't kill kaiju. So he's not a kaiju. But he is the father of kaiju. That one, he's the man. The monster of all, the atomic era, the father of them all, Godzilla, right? But Godzilla had a lot of prodigy. There's a lot of them that came after him, right? I hit up some of my kids in the audience who are going to help me because I get confused with all these names. Okay, you ready? Who's this one? Anyone know? Anguirus, exactly. Right? Debuted in Godzilla Rise Again, 1955. 4-legged monster. He was the distinction of being the first monster to fight Godzilla, and he ultimately became one of his most steadfast allies, right? Mothra. And we're going to talk about Mothra in a minute. Debuted, got a whole bunch of stuff going on with that one. This one? Right. Came out in 1964, right? 3-headed monster, often considered to be the most ultimate and arch enemy of Godzilla, right? Yeah, and who is Milla? What is he? Godzilla's son, exactly. Right? Came out in 1967. I'm only a little older than that. I was not your age at the time. We won't go there. It's a long time ago. All right. Hedorah, exactly. 1971. Right? Bizarre alien fed on pollution, represented all the environmental concerns at the time. Right? Seeing a pattern with these monsters? Gigan, right? A cyborg alien with a buzzsaw in his chest. It's pretty cool. One of Godzilla's most brutal opponents. That's how they list him. I think it's cool. And then as a tech, you got to start loving these guys, right? Who is this? Mega, you're on these. You were right. You knew these. Debuted 1974, Godzilla's doppelganger, right? Violante. Wow, you do have all these down. Okay, 1989. And again, engineered from Godzilla cells, a human. Anyone know what the last one was? A rose. Yeah, someone over there had it. Godzilla, a human, and a rose made him. Destroyer. 1995. Comes from the ocean. Do you guys want to remember how he was born? What brought him into life? Wow, you want to come up and take over? You're really good. Hey, you got this stuff down better than I do. Anyone? Space Godzilla, another one. 1994. Awesome. Born of his cells drifting into space after being exposed to a... Wow. You really do need to come take over. I have to look at my notes. You got this in your head. Orga, yes. All right, 1999. Attempted to absorb Godzilla. Right? Yeah, that one's kind of hard to see. Moto. Yep. Lots and lots and lots of them. Godzilla may have birthed the genre. But then there are lots of other genres, as we saw, right? 129 movies. Lots of other genres spun off from it. All right? Anyone? Mothra, right? 11 appearances in Godzilla movies, 4 standalone movies on its own, except for a chunk of that 129. Rodan, yeah. 1956 was when he first appeared. Gamera, 1965. Got a whole list of his own movies, right? 12 of his own. Diamond, wow, you're 100% so far. You're hot. Daimajin, again, made from another studio as a rival to the Godzilla chain. Took out 1966. And then one of my personal favorites, Ultraman. And we can't really count how many kaiju he had, because I think every episode there was a new one he was fighting. So some ungodly number of kaiju assigned to that one, right? But then we start getting on the bandwagon, right? Turn of the century, we're going, oh yeah, we like this stuff, okay? So now we start getting into it. And we start with Cloverfield, right? Clover Monster starts taking over. We're bringing a whole new kind of approach into the genre, bringing a new face to it. And then 2013, 2018, we bring in Pacific Rim. What was Pacific Rim's biggest contribution into the world of kaiju? Anyone? A very specific thing that they introduced, all right? You got it? Jaeger, right? And what is Jaeger? It's the first time we can fight kaiju. And if you think about it, the idea of a kaiju was that it was a force we can't fight. But now, in 2013, we decide we can. And we bring out Jaeger. For the first time, humanity's science can fight back against our hubris. So the Jaeger meant much more than just cool robots, which were really pretty cool. They were man's humanity and man's technology fighting against man's hubris, right? It's a pretty big step for where we're going. Mythology is about reflecting the times that we live in, right? It's all about looking at the history and looking at who we are. When we stop and we look at these monsters, not just as stories, but as the cultural icons they are, the little footmarks that they were in society, we see some really interesting patterns. 1950s, birth of the monsters, right? This is the genesis. We're just coming off World War II. The world is trying to heal. We're trying to come to an understanding of all the changes that have happened. And our monsters are bigger than we can handle. They are catastrophe on feet. We come into the 1960s, and the spectacle begins, right? Now we start getting into sequels. We bring out Mothra, Rodan, and the Kaiju pantheon grows exponentially. A reflection of the time that was the 60s. Having lived through it, they were interesting times. The 70s, everything falls into absurdity, right? All the 70s movies were just crazy. We had all kinds of crazy things. We had Son of Kaiju and weird, because that's what the 70s were about. Why? Because we were coming off Vietnam. We were coming off a lot of wars. There was a lot of things happening. We were doing a cultural revolution in this country. People were afraid. For those who haven't been around long, if you think times are bad now, they were bad then too. We needed things to laugh about. We didn't need monsters to be afraid of. We needed monsters to bring us pleasure and joy, and our monsters started getting a little weird. Then we move into the 80s. Now things start getting dark again, right? A lot of our 80s movies, we start getting into the return of Godzilla. He's now gone back to being an enemy. He's not just a friend anymore, right? We move in to the 2000s. Now we have this global awakening in the world, right? The world is, Y2K is coming up, everything happened. If you look at our monsters, they reflect a lot of that. They also reflect the technology changes. We can now fight back against our deepest fears. What started from the Kaiju being not understanding radiation has turned into Jaegers allowing us to have the power to fight back against our monsters. That's a lot of growth. It's a lot of stories. There's a lot of mythology, and it only took 129 movies to get there. Kaijus aren't just monsters. They never were. They were born from fear. They were always monsters without malice, without intent. In the beginning, anyway. Got a little crazy in the middle. They are forces of nature, or they the embodiment, which is no different than how we looked at Typhoon and Behemoth and the monsters of mythology. They were never intent. They were never malice. They were forces beyond what we could understand. Godzilla was the embodiment of our nuclear fears. He allowed us to put a face onto a thing that we couldn't understand. Hedorah was our pollution. It came in at a time where we were worried about the earth before we threw it away. And, sorry. And we were worried about what we were doing. And that came out culturally as a kaiju, which is no different than radiation. It was a force we couldn't control. Mechagodzilla, Cold War. We're afraid of tech. We find ways as a culture to use these mega monsters as a reflection of our deepest fears. Monsters allow us to see our fears and to face them. Our bards continue to tell our stories, but we have to listen differently. And I implore everyone in this room to think about how you listen to stories now. As we started, stories are intended to be a cultural reference for us. They are how we bring our morality and our ethics and our history to the next generation. When all of our stories become nothing more than who can get the biggest box office numbers, we do ourselves a disservice. And we start losing these monsters, we start losing these stories as they become homogenized. My name is Captain Victor T. Mayfair. I have a pretty cool podcast. I like it. I have some cool stories to tell if you want to follow me. This is Kaiju today. You can follow me on my websites. You can come down to booth SP14 and talk to me all day. I'm there. And if you liked anything I had to say up here, like and follow, because, all that thing I said don't do anymore, well, I need it in order to get more people looking at my stuff. I'm only a little bit of a hypocrite. Okay. I thank you. That's how to follow me.